My name is Aska Hisa. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement, here to do a quick intro to tonight's very special program. It's in conjunction with two things going on here at ICALA, our exhibition, Scientia Sexualis, and our Booskhelf Residency with GenderFail, Convergence. Tonight's conversation is titled Book Talk, Activism, and Archives, and we have three awesome people to talk about books, activism, archives, and art. So I'm going to do a quick intro. We do these bio sheets so you have the more elaborate, detailed, wonderful accomplishments. But really quickly, Chris E. Vargas is one of the Scientia Sexualis artists and founder and self-appointed executive director of the Museum of Trans Hirstory and Art. Woo-hoo, AKA MOTHA. Hirstory is with an I. It's an institution dedicated to highlighting trans art and gender-neutral, trans-centric art and herstory. MOTHA has just released a book titled Trans Hirstory in 99 Objects. I forgot to bring it with me, but it's up there on the shelf for purchase. It is edited by David Evans Franz, Christine Linden, and Chris E. Vargas. Chris Vargas's work for Scientia Sexualis is titled Reading is Transcendental and is claiming the walls of the museum's bathrooms. So find a reason to go to the bathroom. Find a reason, but don't stay there too long. Be Oakley, artist and founder of GenderFail, a publishing and archiving platform invited to be part of ICALA's Bookshelf Residency to run parallel with Scientia Sexualis. I love Be Oakley's description of their enterprise. GenderFail is not nonprofit, but profit for survival, or profit to continue our work without other means of capital. And most importantly, it is to make money for others I publish, to create profit for labor. Love that. So we just opened the Annex exhibition with GenderFail's intimate and rich project titled An Incessant Unknowability, an archive of protest-inspired typography and its open-source uses, which presents the ongoing series of open-source typographical fonts developed by GenderFail Be Oakley that are inspired by protest signs of events since the Stonewall riots of 1969. And finally, our moderator extraordinary, we have Jeanne Vaccaro. Jeanne is a curator, professor of transgender studies and museum studies at the University of Kansas, and part of the Scientia Sexualis curatorial dynamic duo with Jennifer Doyle, professor of English at UC Riverside. Jeanne and Jennifer are responsible for conceiving, building, and organizing this ambitious group survey of 27 contemporary artists whose work takes up the fraught relationship between sex, gender, and science. This exhibition is realized as part of the ambitious collaboration across arts institutions throughout Southern California known as PST, Art and Science Collide, led by the Getty Foundation. So with the results of the presidential elections last month and yesterday's Supreme Court hearing for U.S. versus Scrimeti, a case whose ruling could have vast consequences for the LGBTQ community and by extension all communities. We're looking at an acceleration of serious threats, more threats around civil rights, bodily autonomy, a defense against sex discrimination, and inequality. So archives of what has been done, activism by writing, publishing, creating, and art that imagines a better world while addressing fraught pasts and presents are what we are going to talk about tonight. At ICALA, our work is to gather, learn, and transform. So thank you, Chris, B, and Jeanne, and for all of you for being here.
Thanks so much, Aska, and thanks everyone for coming out tonight. It's really special to see such a great group of people. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of situating the conversation, and then we're going to hear from both Chris and Bea and then talk to each other, and we're really excited to also talk with you. So this exhibition that Jennifer and I organized, I'm kind of doing like starting with a merch plug, but there's a reason. This is the exhibition catalog, which I really hope you'll take a look at and get. And actually one of our wonderful contributors, Hill Malatino, is in town visiting. So thanks for being here, Hill. And you'll see this font is used throughout the exhibition. It's also on a hat that was made with Seth Bogart and Wacky Wacko. You should get this. It's very mysterious. It's hard to know what Scientia Sexualis means. The title actually comes from Foucault, and it's kind of about the drive to categorization. But I think it's a mysterious and sexy phrase, and on a hat, it could help you pick somebody up or just get a good conversation going at a holiday party. This is the inside of the catalog, and you'll see this typography throughout. And so I wanted to just read something that Jennifer and I wrote for the exhibition that kind of helps to situate it, and then talk you through some of the kind of archival context for it. So as a document of the Scientia Sexualis exhibition, this catalog reflects our curatorial process: relational, collective, interdisciplinary, and iterative. Our attention to aesthetics is informed by awareness of the biopolitical work that gets done through that category. Engaging live currents in art and politics, we see writing as an integral contribution to this exhibition. Even the type design we chose for the catalog signals our investment in language. Sourced from the protest banners of STAR, the Street Transvestites Action Revolutionaries, the typeface was made by artist and publisher Be Oakley as an homage to the direct action and mutual aid organization founded in 1970 by Marcia Payette-Nomine Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Bodily and disruptive, STAR's handmade alphabet channels the intergenerational and collective labor it takes to script a new tomorrow. Our use of STAR thinks cautiously, hesitantly, and hopefully with the language of liberation as it moves from the protest rally to the museum and with you onwards. So, and here it is. It's even on these cool banners outside. And so when we were working on this catalog, we were introduced to this font through Bee's publishing platform and praxis. You can, it's all here as part of GenderFail's Bookshelf Residency and the exhibition. We'll hear more about Bee's work. And we were really interested in thinking about the context of the exhibit, which really thinks through histories of not only violence, but histories of resistance and liberation, and how we might embed those intergenerational conversations into the exhibit and also into the documents of the exhibit. And so I just wanted to share some of these images. So this is a banner here. So as I mentioned, so now Sylvia Rivera and Marcia P. Johnson are kind of very well-known figures. And we can sort of think a little bit about how figures get brought out from history and monumentalized, sometimes over maybe other work that still has yet not been recognized in the same kind of way. So some people may be familiar with these images. So this is, again, they're both holding the banner. This is another one. And we'll hear from Bea the process of how one reconstructs and creates an alphabet from a protest font. This is Marcia P. Johnson in 1972. This is Sylvia Rivera at a St. Patrick's Cathedral protest in a beret. And this is another well-known image. These are from the Rich Wandel papers at the LGBT Center Archives in New York. And that's B.B. Scarpy on the right, my right. And so, as I was saying, now these are figures that are very well-known, but that took quite a long time. Many of you, or how many have seen Sylvia Rivera's Y'all Better Quiet Down speech? Okay, great. So I think it's worth, I won't play too much of it, but it's worth kind of noting that, as I'm skipping ahead, she enters to an enormous amount of boos. She's booed for a very long time before she's allowed to speak. And she was kind of kicked off the stage by this bad Jeanne, not me, the good Jeanne, Jeanne O'Leary, a bad lesbian. I am a good lesbian. So she's booed for a long time. And I just like to kind of sit with that and the resonances of that, and then they kind of try to take her off stage.
I've been trying to get up here all day for your gay brothers and your gay sisters in jail. They're writing me every motherfucking week and ask for your help. And you all don't do a goddamn thing for them. Have you ever been beaten up and raped in jail? Now think about it. They've been beaten up and raped after they haven't spent much of their money in jail to get their cell phone and try to get their sex change. The women have tried to fight for their sex changes or to become women of the women's liberation. And they write STAR, not the women's group. They do not write women. They do not write men. They write STAR because we're trying to do something for them. I have been to jail. I have been raped and beaten many times by men, heterosexual men that do not belong in the homosexual shelter. But did you do anything for them? No, you all tell me to go and hide my tail between my legs. I will not no longer put up with this shit. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation. And you all treat me this way? What the fuck's wrong with you all?
I'll just stop with what the fuck's wrong with y'all. And I think it's a really wonderful way to kind of think about the, I fucked this up. How do I do it? Sorry. How do I make it big? Sorry, guys. What do I do? Okay. That's great. Thank you. I've been using computers for a while. Anyway, thinking about the kind of like, I think there's a better way though, because I want to make it like a full screen. And then so I can go this here. I just start again. Thinking about kind of the questions of prison abolition and the carceral politics that we're facing at this moment. And it's a really great, okay. So anyway, she ends by going on to talk about coming to see us at the Star House, which is on 12th Street in the East Village. And so I wanted to show this really great image from 1971 of a cake sale, like a bake sale that was at the Star House in the East Village, and thinking about the kind of politics of mutual aid and intersectionality that foregrounded this activist work that was not single issue. Here's another one. It's pretty well known. And then I just wanted to show, most people only see the black and white images, but here you can see that the jumpsuit was purple and glittery, and that feels very important for us. And incidentally, the show. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Chris to share a little bit about his practice.
Hi. Nice to see you all. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me to make this work for the show, which, yes, if you haven't used the bathroom yet, please find an excuse to do so. I'll just talk about my project, just intro it in case there's many of you who don't know what it is. I've been working on it since, I guess, 2012, but officially it was launched in 2013. It's an institution dedicated, I'll just read my little notes, dedicated to highlighting the significance of trans art and Hirstory to the current cultural and political landscape. The term Hirstory, of course, is not a typo. It's a gender-neutral spin on the spirit of the feminist reclamation of history into herstory, but I use the lesser-used gender-neutral possessive HIR here. In the early days, MOTHA was an attempt for me to critically examine a heightened moment of visibility when trans art and culture found its way into institutions that had been historically closed off to us. And that includes art, institutions, academia, mass media, among others. And I use this project to investigate the drawbacks of hypervisibility while honoring trans people who have persevered in the many faces of adversity over time. No, keep it there.
Oh, sorry.
Keep it.
Sorry,
I started MOTHA because understanding my experience in a historical context made me feel connected to something bigger, but I also wanted to examine what happens when marginalized histories get absorbed into mainstream institutions and exhibited on bigger platforms. So I started this project with this collage that I made, and I assembled it here sort of in the same way that I do a lot of my work, by like asking people to submit ideas and names, basically crowdsourcing my ideas for my artwork. And I also, so I assembled this over the course of the year, because Photoshop and the lasso tool was laborious at the time. Now it's so much easier. But I wanted to, but I used it to think about what this institution could possibly be, what, how to create a kind of the kind of futility of creating a cohesive trans canon. I wanted to create a canon that was inclusive, which is also impossible. And I also wanted to think about creating something like a cohesive history, an institution around an identity category that is relatively new in terms of contemporary historical understandings of sex and gender, and then that the language is slippery and unstable. And I also did it with humor and kind of levity, hopefully, by including such figures as Peppermint Patty and Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror Picture Show. So yeah, I also thought about processes of canonization. What's the function of the museum? Who decides what's culturally important? What's worth preserving and exhibiting? And what about the history of collections and its connection to colonialism? And so, using this project to think about these questions, I just walked into the metaphorical burning building and made a museum. So now we can advance the slides. So it's now and forever under construction in its formation, and I use this project to do all kinds of projects, and it's taken many forms, including poster graphics such as these. Transvestism in the News was created with the support of Jeanne Vaccaro. Maybe this was the first project that we did together. She invited me to Indiana to look at the Kinsey archives, and these headlines are pulled from a scrapbook of the same name called Transvestism in the News, assembled by early trans activist Louise Lawrence, who had a relationship with Kinsey, and that she connected him to all kinds of people, trans communities, and for his own, I guess, extractive research. Yeah, so I've also done a virtual residency program. Next slide, please. With Tuesday Smiley. Tuesday wanted a line on her CV, and so we just created a virtual residency. And it also accompanied a letter on her behalf. And then years later, the artist Jamie Diaz who was incarcerated for, I believe, almost 30 years, had a friend on the outside who asked about a residency for her. And then, so I made this graphic, made a letter and certificate that was maybe used in Jamie's parole appeal. And, well, cut to, she's out and free, and after 30 years in creating work. I invite you to look at her stuff and support her. I don't want to take credit, because I don't actually know if that certificate was used in the parole appeal, but I'm just going to write that history, and say that it was. And then I did a bunch of exhibitions, including one at the Portland Art Museum, thinking about a trans moving image archive. I did another exhibition at the New Museum, thinking about Stonewall and monuments, and I asked artists to propose new monuments for the Stonewall riots, rebellion, uprising, and then we created I didn't create it, had fabricated this 17:1 model of Christopher Park, and then maquettes of the proposed monuments rotated in and out of the gallery. Also in that space were ready-made objects connected to things that have lore around the inciting of the riots, like a heel, dog shit, bricks, Judy Garland's death. That's the obituary on Be Oakley. And then another show thinking about the trans Hirstories of the Bay Area, and this was within a larger exhibition called Queer California Untold Stories at Oakland Museum of California. And inside, yet another wallpaper, this image of detail, the next one, is material from the GLBT Historical Society connected to Jose Sadia. And then another billboard, another supported work by Jeanne Vaccaro. Thank you for that opportunity. And then this book. There's a kind of a culmination of a bunch of exhibitions thinking about objects connected to Trans Hirstory and objects in a kind of really open and expansive, taking an open and expansive approach. So there's lots of different kinds of things, including things that may or may not have existed that, are there, and it's all paired with scholarship or writing, creative work, or creative texts, lots of different written forms. And these are the beautiful section dividers created by Edie Fake. And then that brings us here to the wallpaper. I don't have to say that or maybe I should just say it out loud, that the bathroom is an extremely charged space for trans people. It's a site of lots of conflict, legislative too, conflict around trans people in public space and these sex-segregated spaces in particular. And it was kind of a wonderful opportunity to bring a little bit of kind of playfulness and joy to that space, while also kind of creating or using it as an attempt to assemble a kind of trans studies canon or trans literary canon as well. And they were taken from all of these bookshelf photos that I had a lot of people send me, including scholars, artists, Zachary Drucker, Moby Dick, the Drag King, Susan Stryker, Jordan Resnick, Joe Giardini, Jed Samer, Fredo Rivera, EJ Colin, friends past, present, future. And then bookshelves. Whenever I would end up in a bookstore and I saw some sort of trans book, I'd take a picture of its spine. And a little version of it is on sale today.
I put the dummy slide in. I'm really sorry.
I was going to tell you, but then...
Why bother?
Why bother?
Today only, this poster, which says $30, is $25. So if you want to get a poster for the holidays, it is December, I would really get one. And a portion of the proceeds goes to a mutual aid library supporting relief efforts in Gaza. So thank you, Chris, for that. And thank you to ICA for being so supportive in these endeavors. And it's right over there. You can see it, the poster. And we'll talk more about that process after we hear from Pete. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris. Oh, here it is, the hats, yeah.
So I'm going to go over some of the typefaces that are featured in this exhibition here and kind of go over the process and notes about creating the series. This was the third protest font I created. The first one was Mother Nature's a Lesbian, which I just was so struck by, like the lettering and the aesthetics of it. And the second one was two signs. One was I am your worst fear, I'm your best fantasy, which some of you maybe have seen before. It's amazing. And then the other sign was like First Gay Americans. I don't really know why I was super attracted to that, but aesthetically it was kind of interesting. But working on this ACT UP protest font was the first time that I kind of realized what these fonts could do in connecting the past to the present. You can go to the next slide. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, this was like one of the only typefaces that has kind of like 1 or 0 through 9 because of this photo in particular too. which is really powerful. And just some notes about this. I'm not a type designer. When I was first creating this, and this one in particular, I didn't even know what kerning was, which is like the space in between the letters. So I think some of them still on my website, if you download it, have like crazy spaces in between, which part of me I love, because these typefaces, a lot of them are meant to be typeset for like an entire essay or an entire book. It's meant to be a title, grab your attention, for really particular uses, and are supposed to kind of like break up the professionalism of what contemporary type design is, which I have no clue about, which is like, I love, I once talked at like a type design conference and I was kind of rude. Like I did this like pre-recorded video and But one with this font in particular, I want to highlight this Textemic book. I worked with this artist, A.L. Steiner, on this public program that they did at the Art Foundation, this Artists on Artists series, and A.L. Steiner picked Laments, which is not the most famous Jenny Holzer work, and it's kind of interesting that Holzer I think it was like 1989 to 1990 did a work kind of commenting on, the AIDS crisis, which I still don't know how I feel about that. And I think some of the artists in this book were commenting on that, but it was really such a good opportunity to typeset part of this book in this ACT UP fonts. And some of the artists were talking about ACT UP and that time period, especially like, the numbers in this. It's just kind of powerful. And as you can see in this bookshelf, like, my queer typefaces are kind of everywhere, and for most of the books, this ACT UP typeface is used for page numbers. And one of the things I love about these fonts is, even if it's just for a moment, when you're looking up at the back of the book, you acknowledge ACT UP, you acknowledge the source material, you're interested in kind of learning more about what these fonts are, like these weird things that aren't like beautifully designed or not typically designed. And to quickly go over the process, go to the next slide maybe. I put this note in at a weird place. You can keep going. So the next font that I endeavored to do was, I think I made this a few days after this event happened, which was at the Brooklyn Museum, the Brooklyn Liberation March. I think probably to this day, it's still the largest gathering of people in support of Black trans people, which is really powerful. And me making these fonts, it kind of highlights why I do this. I was living in New York City at the time. I wanted to go to this event, but because I have a really bad panic and anxiety disorders, the staff knows I take trains, and I've been taking trains here from the East Coast, and I did fly on the way here, and I actually just bought a plane ticket, or not a plane ticket, a train ticket, because I don't want to fly back, so I just spent like a lot of money doing that, but it's worth it. But one thing that I want these fonts to do is to historicize events. So, if I can do one thing, especially with this typeface, is help to cement this font or this event as a historical moment in life, or help, and it makes me think of like, what does it mean? How do we historicize things? Like, who determines that? How does that happen? And I think my greatest hope is that in some small way, I've been able to do that through this font. Go to the next one. I'm trying to find, I think it's later on. There's like but anyway, this work in particular, these series of typefaces and, I remember what I'm saying. I have a lot of notes. I usually don't have notes, and it messes me up, and that's why I don't do it, because I go off script. But I remember what I was going to say. So with my panic and anxiety disorder, I often do not go to public protests. That's not the way that I protest, like through printed matter, through my press, through these typefaces are ways that I do that. I think of myself in these typefaces as expanding upon protest events, to think about, the care work or, the print as protest. Like, that's kind of the space that I'm in. And an essay that I really, really love a lot is Joanna Hedva's Sick Woman Theory, if any of you have read that before. It's, she kind of talks about, public protests and I guess the inherent ableism in some sense of them, not everyone is able to be in public at all times, and what does it mean for certain people to be, protesting on the streets, and kind of the myriad of things that in cases. So I love that essay. It's been super influential in this body of work and other works that I've done. I love that so much. And quickly, these are just images from Kim Contemporary Art Center in Estonia, using the Black Trans Lives Matter font. Go back 2 slides. So you can kind of see them there. And I think it's kind of interesting to, display and share this event in Eastern Europe, in a place like Estonia and Latvia. It's kind of interesting to, especially like, I hear a lot of conversations like, oh, Europe doesn't have a racism problem, that's an American problem, which it obviously isn't. And in a small way, my hope would be like the viewer to kind of question those assumptions and also to honor this event and tie it into the other work in the next slide that you can go past now. So this font is so each time I make a font, I feel like it goes even closer to what I want to do. So this font is based on one protest event called Seize Control of the FDA, which was the first national action by ACT UP on October 11th, 1988, at the FDA headquarters in Silver Springs, Maryland. So when working on this typeface, or any of these typeface, I often can't find certain letters, or not all the letters are on the protest signs. And in this one in particular, I couldn't find the letter Q, which thinking about kind of a contemporary context for Q with the LGBTQ community, or, I identify as queer still. I mean, I don't even know if I do anymore. It's kind of funny, like, now just calling yourself gay feels queer. There's like how these things, like gay feels more radical now than queer in some sense. That's not necessarily true, but so instead of the letter Q, which you can kind of see in this publication, it's this bloody handprint, which was used in this protest a lot. So I think it was really kind of like unintentionally profound, especially in the modern use of this typeface. The letter Q comes up a lot, and you're kind of reminded of that bloody handprint. And I think it's really easy to kind of see that handprint as a stand-in for, the millions upon millions of people that, have died because of the inaction and, of the FDA and the greed of pharmaceutical companies and everything like that. You can go to the next slide. These are just like documentation of some of I created these a few years ago, so I don't know which signs were used exactly, but just some of I did the same image twice, but some of the you can go to the next slide. One thing I want to highlight about ACT UP and this event in particular is ACT UP would do a lot of research, and for this event they made an action handbook, which was like multiple pages long with, one of the things, or one of the chapters in it was why the FDA, they did so much research, and I created a publication just based on this font, so kind of like a font book, and I thinking about the internet. I republished the introductory paragraph of the handbook from ACT UP and typeset it in the protest events from that event, and that felt really powerful. You can go to the next slide. I think I did this exhibition at Women's Studio Workshop highlighting this font and kind of the history of it, and the protest font posters similar to the ones in the Annex gallery for this one font, and on one of the posters and in the gallery as well as a reprinting of that handbook and that first paragraph. As queer people with Chris's amazing project, we have to unfortunately teach ourselves our own history, because obviously we're not taught this in at least K through 12. I mean, maybe some schools do for children growing up, but I highly doubt. I can't think of any off the top of my head, so we have to teach ourselves and tell our own histories. You can go to the next slide. Just some more documentation. You can see that handprint blown up, which when you have a typeface, it's vectorized, so it can be blown up really, really big, which is incredible. So this is the most recent typeface that I created, and I actually just finished it yesterday for inspiration for this talk, just because I, was writing notes and I have been meaning to finish this. This is based on, I'm calling it Hins Hall, the 2024 Columbia University encampment protests for Gaza at Columbia University that sparked so many protests around the country. Students are such a compass. Students are incredible, especially university students, are all young people, are just I get inspired and re-energized and recommitted to liberation movements through students all the time. They are the guiding star for sure. And this is the second font that I've created from protests against the Israeli genocide of Palestinians. And especially with this font, it's really important for me to historicize this event. As soon as this happened, I instantly was like, yes, I want to eventually, make this into another font to use it to remember it. And this is the font that I was the slide I was trying to get to talk about the process of making them quickly. I use this program, Glyphs. It's really simple. So what I do is I take a photograph. In Photoshop, I, just use filters and, contrast and, separate the letters. Then in Illustrator, which isn't up there, I vectorize them. Then I literally can copy and paste it into this Glyphs program and then try to make the spaces not too big like I used to the kerning and export it, and it's done. I especially don't try to create my own letters for some of them. In the past, I think the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, I think I inspired by it, created the rest of the alphabet, but I don't really do that anymore because I want to, do a one-on-one, just as close as I can to the original letters. And one thing I just want to commend the ICA for, which Jeanne mentioned earlier, was how I'm just so thankful that I got no pushback. I obviously have a poster that says someone I love is fighting like hell for Palestine, literally no pushback. And more institutions should be like the ICA LA, and we really appreciate it. And also, just in the last comment here, I want to, GenderFail does endorse and commit to the, PACB, which, let me just make sure I say the full thing correctly. 1 second. The Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. I think it's super important for small presses, larger institutions, if they can, to commit to this, to put pressure on the Israeli government to end the almost 80 years of siege and genocide and occupation of Palestinian land. So that's super important. If you want to learn more, I have information over there about that, a bookmark and more information, and feel free to reach out to me to help you do that in your own practice in life and encourage others to as well. So, done.
Thanks so much, Bea. So maybe I'll kick off with a question or two, and I'll give you all time to think about your questions and comments, and then we can all talk. This was such a great image, and I wanted to actually look at the encampment here. It was in both of your presentations. I was thinking about the relationship between language and infrastructure, kind of what it takes to build a font, build a space, build a movement, how those things kind of transform and evolve. MOTHA is a fictional museum, which is so smart, but we are in a real museum, a brick and mortar museum. And so I'm wondering if we can kind of start by thinking about the work that it takes to be inside of these spaces, to strategically inhabit them, to transform them, and how you each kind of do that in your practices, bringing things like people's bookshelves into museum spaces, or bringing the protest rally into the museum.
Yeah, I guess I do definitely have some experience. It's great that, like I was saying before, that I say that there's no pushback about this, but I've been independent so long with GenderFail, and I, haven't had a lot of institutional support that I, don't ask permission. Oscar's been amazing in the museum. This all sounds good, yeah, I don't care as much about, pissing anyone off. I want to burn bridges. I've made GenderFail fairly survivable of getting on people's bad sides, which I don't think I have to. I want to be more angsty than I actually am. Most people don't care. I almost want someone to be mad, but they just don't care enough about me to get to that level. Yeah, I guess one thing I would say is just not to care too much about institutional feelings, or, to be stubborn when you need to. Didn't have to do that here, so you saved me from that, I guess, from the fight I wanted to have. I think, and there's a lot of, and also take advantage of institutions, get as much money as you can out of them, which is weird. I mean, that being said, the SA has been so supportive and so amazing with funding, but, I sell to a lot of like museums, like libraries, and I charge like 3, 4, 5 times what I would charge the average public, and extracting as many resources as you can from some of these spaces, because obviously if you look at the funding for all institutions, you'll find shit you don't want to find, so just get as much out of it as you can. That's always my advice. Yeah,
it's hard to piss them off or like come in with institutional critique and then have it be that controversial, because I mean, there's wonderful people within institutions, obviously, but the histories of them are, embedded in all the other bad, terrible cultural ills of all of our institutions. But like you, I always use this project to kind of wedge my foot in the door and shoe in as many other artists and people that I possibly can using my opportunities. This project has been very attractive to institutions like right out of the gate, which was kind of wonderful. And also I didn't ever take that lightly. And then, I've worked with such amazing people and had so much amazing support, but also taking that same stance of like getting as much as I possibly can out of it. And while knowing that, like, I think it was maybe someone in My Barbarian that wrote this about kind of institutional critique. Forget which of the 3, but it was like they like when you bite the hand that feeds them.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's been my experience.
Well, I think too with MOTHA, like with the Stonewall. The kind of commemorative project, like consciousness raising at the new museum, for those who saw it, was like such a brilliant show. And Jibs, did you have a thing in it too? I can't remember. You did, right? What was it?
Thank you. What happened in the club, like the sort of warmth and haven and people dancing and whatever. I mean, there was also drama, of course, but and then there was like the object. So and I didn't really know. I knew like a very little amount about the history of what all happened and everything. So it was a beautiful project. But they were like silly little cartoons, and then they were like stuck on these like blobs of like clay or so. I don't even know how the museum did it. I was like, here's my anyway, I don't do a lot of museum 2D type of things. But yeah, it was a great project.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you brought so many other people into it rather than thinking of it as like a single authored work. The MOTHA and GenderFail are both so collaborative in terms of like working with artists, but also working with like generational histories, and kind of using this as a platform to bring other people along and kind of show that this work is collective. Rather than institutions can sometimes sort of like fetishize and like single out, especially marginalized artists. Maybe.
Well, I also want to just highlight again what you did for creating those residencies for artists that wanted that. That's like a perfect illustration of like leveraging like this like institutional access for people. I should do that more. I mean, I have in small ways, like my partner. Like romantic and helps me with GenderFail. Like I'm like, yeah, say you're the co-director. I don't, like leveraging things is like what we can do. It's like easy and important. But yeah, I thought that was like, I need to do that more often, just like help people in any way, to leverage whatever capital I have,
Yeah, power in a large part is an illusion. It's construct, and we all buy into certain aspects of it and lots of aspects within our lives. And if you can create your own and then have people invest in it, in some way, yeah, the cultural capital of that is weirdly strong.
Can you talk about the process of talking with people about photographing their books and producing the wallpaper? Because Jennifer and Chris and I talked about this for I don't know how long, years maybe?
Years. I think I photographed your shelf like 2021 or something when I first started drawing. I don't know. Yeah, okay.
Well, you were
yeah.
doing this already before.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't conceived of for the exhibition, but it kind of developed and it became something that was going to debut as part of the exhibition. So you were already drawn to some kind of documenting people's bookshelves and this process already. So I wonder how that began and then how it kind of evolved.
I mean, I think thinking about collections and people's books collections when they come into archives as like a unit is an interesting portrait of a life lived, and also a portrait of a lot of scholarly work and somebody's interests. And, you know, I particularly like going into people's houses and looking at their bookshelves and judging them from there, judging whether I can hang out with them. You know, I think John Waters said it best, like if you go to somebody's house and they don't something, I'm gonna mess up this quote, they don't have books, don't fuck them or something.
And this is also like a thing you do, or I do, with going to see a new therapist. You know, like you really are like, do you have like airplane, you know, airport art on your walls, or do you have, you know, and actually the Nicole Eisenman painting, the self-portrait of her laying on the analyst couch, and so much of that, the beauty of that painting are, you know, the bookshelves, the kind of like canon of like Freudian and Lacanian and Heidegger and all this kind of stuff, and it signals for you. Yeah, it's erotic.
Yeah, and seeing over like it's erotic. Yeah, it's also like seeing over the course of my lifetime, like the emergence of trans studies and like trans like lit and lots of cultural work, like past and present and future, emerge as I live was really exciting. And books are beautiful. In the process of making my own over many years, I started to like imagine how mine was going to exist in this like cultural conversation within these texts, and I was really excited about it. So just that was also part of that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I also, before this talk, I mentioned like one of the drawings, you can see that one of the books has been like well used, and like that moment was like so special to see, like, and it kind of like connects more. Like I should have known that these were photographs sourced from something, but I'm just like, oh, you just drew this whole, you know, from your own archive. But just like seeing that moment of like a spine that's been well used is like a really powerful thing to I've written about, like one of my publications, I kind of talk about like in an archive, what I love most is like seeing like the hand and the body in the book, like, you know, well used. Like once I did a book fair, and someone brought this like really beat up copy of one of my books, and that's like the biggest honor that anyone can do, is to bring back a publication that's been well used. Like I'm sure with that catalog over time, like that will happen, and it'll be really special to see like the body's interaction with this publication. Like it's not meant to stay pristine, you know, like the more it's used, the more like power and agency that it has. And I think that's really special.
Yeah, I think it's such a nice part of your practice with looking at the banners, because those are like brought out into the world. They're put up, you know, in front of the tents, or they're brought into the streets, and they get rain on them, or they get crumpled up into people's backpacks, and they've been, you know, made the night before with paint and stenciling, and they're very, you know, they're meant to be used in the world, which is what language is. You know, language is used in there, and that's why it gets chiseled away at and evolves. And it's so wonderful to think about how you both kind of like engage with the way language moves over time. So Chris's, you know, we can go back to it, posters, also history, all the different things. Here it is, Les story. People don't know about the here and the Z anymore. I like to tell those to my students. I think I'm like 800 years old. Back in the early 2000s. So yeah, maybe we could, before we open up to the audience, you could each say something about what it means to kind of like return to the past. Sometimes these kind of like problematic pasts, or corny pasts, or you know, transphobic pasts, even in the history of gay liberation, to build these usable futures.
I mean, I've always been interested in queer and trans history, and artists working with archives or like creatively using the gaps as like this generative space to engage with the gaps in the archive, and also and yeah, using that, like doing it as this kind of in the present active relationship with history, like inserting one's own history or creating one's history where one's doesn't exist. I think in my early work, I started in film and video, and that's basically what I did. I like rewrote certain aspects of people's biography and inserted myself in them. And in that way, that kind of continues in a lot of this work, and like in just this active in relationship with the past, knowing that it is alive in the present in various ways, in ways that obviously we have a political stake in.
Yeah, thinking about the gaps and how to fill them in is so helpful, and leaving them open for people to continue to kind of engage with. Yeah.
Yeah, to reference another work in your amazing exhibition, the POZ since 1492, and in some ways what I try to do is like show how long these struggles are, and that, it's easy to like, just, especially now with, Trump and all the, short-term horrible things happening, just to show the arc of these movements and how, this has been happening in different ways, as Damien amazingly points out, since 1492, like the, birth of colonialism here in the Americas on indigenous land. So, and I also, even with my exhibition and this show, just that work, welcoming you or challenging you into this space is just like a perfect illustration of that. I've also been a fan of theirs for a while. So, and they were, for others, they were here a few days ago for Day Without Art. Yeah, that's what it's called, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you. So we have microphones, and we would love to hear your thoughts and your comments and your questions. And oh yeah, James, and then in the back.
I'll take this mic back. This is so good. Thank you so much for bringing this together and for this beautiful show. I'm so moved by like what struck me about with the like your work to get like both of your work is like this very tender like private zone of like going so deep into detail and like mining history in this like meditative way, which is really amazing and kind of like effective on so many different levels. Like, as it really makes you think about the labor, like the labor of building and also the labor of what, just like what people have done in protest for so many years, and even having a bookshelf and then reflecting someone's book and just knowing, oh, there's a person who wants to understand, like there's a person who wants to understand. There's like, we're not alone in this way. And it's just, I love it. Also, I've had that transvestitism in the news behind me for like all through COVID. And I went on so many Zooms in the back, and I went on Zooms that were like with activists that I was like, oh my God, like they brought the whatever. Anyway, I love that so much. Anyway, I guess my question is like, how do you go about like sharing, like how do you find folks that have made these things, and like how do you build relationships with people who are like I'm just so curious, like Chris, like with your video print, like do any of those people ever have a relationship with your work, like that know that it becomes part of an archive, or would be like, have you ever like, I mean, I'm sure there's a relationship when you are like with contemporary protest stuff, like how do you bring people in the present, like, or does that happen, or does it, you get contacted or something like that? Anyway, it's beautiful show.
Yeah, I actually did a font that I didn't show just for this reason. Like, there was another action a year later at the Brooklyn Museum, an action for trans youth, and I mainly focus on like one or two protest signs. And the artist reached out and was like, "This is cool that you did this, but it's so like their hand was in it too much. They're like, can you not share this, you know? Because I just kind of made it from my knowledge, an anonymous protest sign. And then they're like, I love this, but, you know, I'd rather you not share it because of that. So like that kind of happens sometimes too, where it's like the friction of that of like, because I work really fast to do this too. And, you know, it's like not technically asking permission to make fonts off of these protest signs. And they weren't like offended. It was their hand and their lettering was so, personal to their work that they didn't want it shared. And in one of the publications, I've done 2 volumes of this anthology of queer typography, and I published like our interaction, our conversation about it too, to kind of show that friction in a kind of interesting way. Yeah.
I have an anecdote about, I mean, most people are either alive and I have a relationship with or built a relationship with to include in various parts of projects. But when I did this show at the Oakland Museum, focusing on trans histories of the Bay Area, I pulled a lot from the GLBT Historical Society, and they have a lot of Sylvester's garments, which are really beautiful, and we got to exhibit one of them in the show. And some family members of Sylvester came and were really not happy with Sylvester being kind of inserted into a trans history, because they were really adamant that Sylvester was a gay man and really identified as a gay man, and therefore mutually exclusive of any sort of gender transgressive history or that being totally separate. And I kind of got scared about that, but of course I had I've been thinking about this in regards to this project, like you can't do this history with a really solid definition of what anything is, because it's slippery, it's constantly evolving. What trans means now isn't what it meant 10, 20 years ago. And I think I said something really brief that like, this is an expansive history. I'm not saying that Sylvester is trans, but that Sylvester's gender is iconic for a lot of people, you know? And I think that they weren't really willing to hear it. But yeah, but there's so many tricky moments like that, because especially when we start to like create boundaries within with identities, and especially trans stuff in regards to the past, and kind of retroactively layering or placing that identity category on somebody who maybe didn't even have access to it. Just thinking about that question has been like real central to a lot of my work, or with this project. Yeah.
Hi. So I was thinking about the archive as having like the potential for co-optation by institutions, and specifically with the encampment font, I was thinking about, there was a story where an archivist from the Columbia Library took some of materials from the encampment without the students' permission, and there was this worry that similar to the way that Columbia like invokes the 1968 protests as part of its history, even though it was like using police military to suppress those things, and this worry that, you know, this will be co-opted by the institution into a story it tells about itself, even though it was like using force to try to repress that from happening. So it kind of gets to some of these questions about like consent and stuff, but if you have anything, thoughts around that, thank you.
Yeah, I remember during the pandemic, the Whitney Museum almost put on this exhibition of like protest-inspired art that they bought. Like a lot of them they bought on like sale for fundraisers, and they got a lot of backlash for that. Just when you started thinking about that, I instantly thought of that. Or even like with my fonts, because it's like, you know, that's why all of the ones that I make are open source. It's like to say I own any of this would be like a conceptual failing, I think. One of the things I wrote that I don't think I said that I liked in my head, I'm like, oh, this is poetic and nice. It's like I'm like maybe stewarding the letters. I thought that was really like profound. When when you think of an idea, you're like, oh yeah, that's it. People are going to be impressed by that. But there is on my website I do where you download them. I have this very angsty like, if you're a major institution, don't you fucking dare download and use these. But yeah, especially with me, you're just thinking about our projects too. You're like mentioning people, and a lot of like with the star font, like you know the authors, but a lot of these are so anonymous. And obviously, with that one interaction that I had with that person, they didn't want it shared, but that is kind of the rub with that, But yeah, it's kind of funny contrasting like a lot of mine are nameless protest signs, and you're naming individual people, and it's such a it's coming at it from a different way. That's kind of beautiful in this ways that we're looking at history. But no, that's a good thought that I think about. But one of my strengths as an artist is I work really fast and sometimes break things and try to have care. But I've made also like this is like a retrospective. Like in the 10 years, I've editioned 134 books. Some are like the same book reedition, but I work really fast.
I have two questions, but I don't think one of them's even going to form. I'll just start with like, I love that I saw your poster in a bathroom. Like I was just remembering seeing all these faces, and then you flip the poster over and you can read all the names.
What bathroom?
It was a friend's place in Highland Park, and I was just thinking how fun it is when you stumble on stuff. And one of the things I talk a lot with my friends about is like the care you give yourself as a creator. Like I was really intimidated by how much GenderFail just produces, and I'm so glad you're like, I work fast, because there's a part of you that's like, that's a lot. Like if I'm trying to think about disability, this is a terrible example of like the expectation of a kind of bar of production. But thankfully I'm in my head like, hopefully you're really inconsistent. Or like, hopefully things are really unclear. Like something has to be
there's
messy.
spelling errors and some,
Oh, yeah,
I'm not a
this.
perfectionist. I mean, it's called GenderFail, so I think it's built in.
Right.
It's baked into it a little bit.
And like what's a little strange is sometimes the language like sounds like the way white folks just claim being like a leader. Like you even said something like, I work fast and break things, which I thought was like a Steve Jobs quote or something. I don't remember.
Oh, it might be actually. Well, yeah, I think it unintentionally is. I mean, yeah.
But I feel like the only words that I wrote is like, what if all these things are just like so weirdly hypocritical? Like the idea of sexy archives. Like I always have to convince students, you don't get it. The archives are imperfect. You won't find the shit you're looking for. You're just hanging out in a dusty place that no one wanted you there, and it's not easy to navigate. And somehow a bunch of queer people love them. I can't explain what it is. But I wrote down this concept of like, what if it's like being like a sissy leader? Like, I don't really believe in confidence, but the question I wanted to ask had something to do with like, how do you determine what doesn't need to be accurate? I'm gonna get this wrong, but I wanna say that was it like Sylvia Rivera's like may or may not have been a major part in the beginning of the Stonewall things, but I love the autobiographical things where it's like, but why not be that person? And then I was just writing another note of like, oh, maybe it's about by any privilege necessary. Like if I can be there to be the right voice, fuck the details. But then how do you decide what needs to be accurate? I know a lot of Black folks who are like, I can't get this wrong. I don't have the privilege. And I think about what is not negotiable, like that kind of quote, nothing about us without us. Like there's some things you just almost never play with, and yet everything else can be totally not sacred. So I'm curious about how do both of you, when you're thinking about your practice, like what do you let go and what are you like, you're like, this system is what makes it work?
So I have published a lot of things, but a lot of my production that's fast is self-publishing. When I work with other artists, it definitely slows down a lot. So I think in a given year, I publish maybe 3 like major works of other artists' work, and that definitely is slower also because it's really expensive. And I do work, thankfully, just because of like the community that I've fostered so many different perspectives and different voices through GenderFail, and that definitely is not fast Steve Jobsy. That, you know, like is slow, obviously, for, and also another thing of like working fast for GenderFail is unfortunately like the pressures of capitalism. I do live off this work, you know, so it's like I don't know, I guess I don't think too hard about it. Like I just, when I have an idea of like a thing to self-publish, I have the means of production and do it, and don't think too long about should I do it or not do it. I just kind of go with just intuitively what I feel is important to work. Like I don't have nice equipment. I mean, I've made a lot of these books. Like I don't have like a very nice printer. I got mine for like $800. I have like a $100 stack cutter. Like I don't have professional equipment, and which is like I taught for a couple of years too. And I love that I just kind of make within my means. So when I taught, I told students not to shoot for the stars. That was like one of my bigger advices, is to really look at the resources you have around you, you know, steal from your university. When I was in graduate school, I published a couple of these using all the toner. And I remember we were in a like graduate meeting and they're like, why are we running through toner so much? And I was just like, you know, quiet, you know, I'm not the first one to do that and I won't be the last. I was going to say one more thing that was lost. Okay.
Yeah, why do people like archives is a really good question. But yeah, I mean, the archive is there's so many holes and there's gaps, and really that's a generative space to work from. Like I said that already. But the incompleteness is an opening. It's an invitation, and that's always been an exciting place for me. Like Trans Hirstory and 99 Objects is everything I do is also like a parody of another museum's practice. So there's the history of the world in 100 objects that the British Museum put out, and then the Smithsonian History of America in 101, and just backing that up and realizing that this was never going to be a complete history, and that it was always going to be this active place that people were going to engage with. It was, yeah, exciting for me.
I just wanted to come in with like a comment. I really appreciated the things that you were saying, and I just wanted to share that like haunting fear of getting it wrong was so with us in writing. For the catalog, everything you see on the walls is like really terrifying. But something you said though about privilege, and that the degrees to which people carry that worry about whether or not what I'm saying is right or accurate and the like. I thought there's two things I wanted to share. One was something that's stayed with me since I first read it, which was something that Julia Kristeva writes in the magnificent book on depression, Black Sun. And she writes that, you know, the depressed, because sometimes when people are really intensely depressed, they can't speak. And she describes that as like being paralyzed by the awareness of the way that language doesn't carry your full being, right? Which is just true, but that in order to speak, we have to launch ourselves into a space in which we disavow that, allow ourselves to forget it. You know, and I found myself, when you were talking, I found myself thinking of both Bea and Chris's work and Jeanne's work, right? About just being able to launch yourself into the space, like you were saying, that's like an opening. And then I did want to say that those things that we can't know for sure, that sense, that's a big part of Black feminist theory and thinking. And in the banners, there are these names, and they're names that appear in the memoir, the J. Marion Sims's book about himself as awful gynecologist, or they're the names of enslaved people who were photographed by Louis Agassiz, and they're like names that appear in like the annals of like, you know, white supremacist science, and we don't really know if those are the names really, right? Because those are the names that we are receiving through this completely polluted apparatus. You know, so there are these possibilities for radical solidarity between like the different positions that are kind of represented by works like Black feminist work and trans work in this show. And I think for me, it's one of the most powerful kinds of things. And this conversation just made me see a whole other kind of vector of connection that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, there's this great quote, this political, I don't know what this scholar Carla J, who always says that no one was taking the attendance at the Stonewall riots, you know? Like, Marsha and Sylvia were probably not there. You know, Tourmaline has made a beautiful film called Happy Birthday, Marsha, about, you know, Marsha being like sad and crying. It was her birthday. And, you know, and there were many other, like that night became something, but the people who were in that moment, like fighting back against police brutality, weren't doing it to be, you know, memorialized on T-Mobile floats or whatever godforsaken hellscape we currently live in. But, you know, and like the riot at Compton's Cafeteria in 1966 in San Francisco has not been memorialized in the same way. And so just thinking about these like gaps in our endeavors within institutions to also wrestle back the way things have been canonized, the names that have been uplifted against those that have been forgotten. And that's just our kind of continual work, and projects like this have allowed us to be really thoughtful and expansive in our work of memorializing to build better futures and livable presence. So maybe I want to just say again, the poster is only $25 tonight. So go buy it and come and say hi. We're so grateful that you all come and support the exhibition, and go buy all the 134 titles for sale tonight. Thank you all
but
so
only
much.
45 of them are for sale. Yeah.